Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Wiscombe Park on behalf of the Vintage Sports Car Club for our annual Speed Hill Climb here. It's an event that's been going for a very, very long time. We're thinking back into the very late 70s, certainly the early 80s. VSCC very active here, usually in tandem with the 500 Owners Association, who were into bat yesterday. And we've got a lovely entry for you of around 100. The paddock is filling nicely. There's a great atmosphere, and what better way to enjoy a day in South Devon. My name is Marcus Pye. I'm joined by Peter Hughes here in the commentary box. We're up in the bottom of the paddock, and the event is being streamed as well. Unfortunately, at the moment, there's a problem, a stoppage up on the hill, so the hill is red flagged, and the course, once clear, we'll be given the go-ahead to bring the next cars down. We're in the middle of the practice sessions, 2 practice sessions per car, per competitor, and then we go into the actual competition runs. It's only in the competition runs, 2 of those, that the awards are decided. But it's brewing nicely, and we're enjoying our time here in the second of the Vintage Sports Car Club speed events for 2022. Great history of competition here at Wiscombe, as we've said, and we've spoken to numerous competitors who've been hill climbing here for many, many moons, and it's great to be at a place which goes back in speed event history to 1958. Indeed. And it's really bizarre that both Peter and I are 1958 children. Peter,
I was going to say it was a very good year, 1958, wasn't it?
A reasonable vintage, we could say. But yeah, I've been coming here since the 1970s, and followed the National Hill Climb Championship rounds and some of the Woolbridge Motor Club clubbies, and one of the Woolbridge sages, Colin Rolls, was here to greet me at the gate this morning. He's the main man when it comes to Wiscombe in terms of putting the events on, with the Chichester family, our gracious hosts here outside their beautiful home. So Speed Hill Climb very much a part of this venue for more than 60 years, and been around at the National Championship for the majority of those. And I think today, as we look down the entry, we go through, Peter, through the traditional classes. We start with the Lost in Sevens, which are so popular. We've got Rileys as well, and without the likes of Austin, Riley and Fraser Nash, the world would be a much poorer place in terms of motor cars, and certainly motor cars with a competition potential. We go through, we've got Alvis, Lee Francis, beautiful Roche Talbot in among them. Some fabulous concoctions in there. So we've got the rather marvellous Picard Pictet Sturtevant Aero Special, all 9 litres of it, and the Hull Scott Aero engined Austin, Jeff Smith and Edward Way competing in those cars respectively. We've got MGs, of course, another key mark. Among them we've got various cars such as the Morgan Riley, which has been around for a while. Wolseley Hornet Specials, they're quick. Going down through the order, a lot of hill climb specials, actual cars that were just concocted for speed events. We've got Alta with us as well. I think we're supposed to have a Connaught coming out later. Got an interesting Fraser Nash with a Bugatti engine, which sounds absolutely fabulous. And yeah, and of course the hallowed ERA.
Absolutely, I can't feel it recalls an era when some of the finest automotive engineering in the world was taking place here in Britain. Much of it by manufacturers, but some of it, some remarkable engineering being done in people's sort of backyards and things as well, but in those days.
The traditional men in sheds, as
Absolutely,
they say. I'm
yeah.
sure there were some women in sheds as well who were equally busy making their competition cars. So just this stoppage at the moment before we move into competition. And I can see down there 162 sitting there, dark green car ahead of me. That's Ian Baxter's Alta 61 IS single seater. It's a quick car. It's a car with a history with Philip Jucker driving it back in the day. Alta, a fascinating mark, run by Geoffrey Taylor, based in Surrey. And this is a manufacturer that built most of its car from scratch and had quite a bit of success certainly in the shorter events. But it's a very, very quick car. It's a contender for best time of the day here at Wiscombe today, and we will see how that all unfolds. But at the moment, still, the marshals are clearing the course, and we will go into action just as soon as we can.
What you mentioned Alta, of course, Marcus, and one of the names that is associated with Alta a lot, someone who absolutely fascinates me, was George Abecassis, who was a remarkable driver, but also a remarkable war hero as well, who did some pretty impressive special missions as a pilot, ultimately getting shot down. I love the story. When he got shot down, he crash landed the plane. He was known, I think, as one engine landing George before that anyway, because he had a knack of bringing back badly damaged planes and landing them safely. But he did an emergency landing before he was captured in, I think, 1944 by the Germans. He said it was quite easy to land because the plane was on fire, so it lit up the land ahead of us.
Wonderfully modest kind of a chap, and it's great. I mean, he was a fine driver, and in all kinds of all manner of things. And his son, his grandson, Jonathan Abecassis, competes to this day in a quick Healy. Was out at Donington Park last week, and George himself competed a few times at Donington in that pre-war period when the circuit was first used in the 1930s, and good to see that grandson is continuing the family tradition in the centenary year of the birth of Tom Wheatcroft. I think it might even be 100 years today since really? Tom Wheatcroft, who saved the circuit and brought it back to life in the 1970s, was born. The extraordinary entrepreneur, the Leicester house builder, who amassed an absolutely astounding collection of single-seater race cars, and then rebuilt a circuit on which to let them play.
It was wonderful, and it was wonderful that it is wonderful that the circuit is still there. It's a shame, perhaps, that the collection of cars has been broken up now. It's not there anymore, because that was a fabulous museum.
It was, but of course, Tom, who was a real entrepreneur, very, very clever fellow, bought a lot of the cars when they were pretty much valueless.
Yeah.
And as the values escalated over the years and historic racing became stronger, there was more of an appetite to have those sort of cars. Then values shot up, and of course after he went, the temptation was to move on to other projects, to let the circuit go to new leaseholders, effectively, Motorsport Vision, Jonathan Palmer's enterprise, and a lot of the cars found new owners and are back out on track, and many would argue that that's the best place for them. A long dormant historic car in a museum is probably quite a sad one as a soul.
Yeah. I can remember going there, many years ago now, but I took a friend from America to the museum. It was a chap, we became friends because of a common interest in John Godfrey Parry Thomas, who you may have heard of, a good Welshman. In fact, Lee, the chap I'm talking about, named his company Pendine Motorsport Marketing after Barry Thomas out in Connecticut. He was just totally blown away by the museum at Darlington. But,
yeah, amazing, and that whole story of exhuming Babs from the sands there and rebuilding it to run again is one that you clearly know very well. And as a kid, I remember being driven down Pendine Sands. You could just drive on and off down the sands by my mother, now 90. The only time she ever drove a motor car. And it scared her rigid, so it wasn't to be repeated. Bit like her first attempt at drinking coffee. Once tried, never repeated.
And there is, of course, a museum at Pendine as well. They've extended it a bit, but certain times the Babs is in the museum, and various other speed record cars and so on. I actually got involved when Royal Mail issued some commemorative stamps commemorating speed record breakers. They asked me to do a little bit of work with them, and it was the only time in history that Babs and Malcolm Campbell's Bluebird were on the Pendine Sands together. That's quite a few years ago now, but we managed to get both cars there together, which was quite...
Was Babs driven on that occasion?
Yes, I think, if I remember rightly...
Did Geraint drive it?
Yeah.
Geraint Owen.
Yeah. It was Owen Winowen who his father, who, as you say, dug the car up. And
it crashed in, what, 1927, was it?
27 it crashed.
Yeah.
69, I think it was excavated.
It's remarkably well preserved, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Although one of the things he found was that before it was buried, the team had slashed all the seats in the car, all the seating. Through, well, he felt it was probably because they were so upset. I don't know. We can't really tell.
Sure.
I mean, there are some amazing stories around it. He always stayed at the Beach Hotel in Pendine, and was very fond of the young girl, the daughter of the landlord and landlady, and became a sort of honorary uncle. And she wanted, before the fateful run, she wanted to give him a teddy bear as a good luck mascot. And he's reputed to have said to her, "Thank you, but I put not my trust in false idols," and wouldn't take the teddy bear. I mean, there are all sorts of things. He was suffering from the flu when he did that run, the fateful run. He stayed overnight, as he usually did, because he lived in the grounds of Brooklands in a bungalow called the Hermitage, which I think is underneath Tesco's these days in Brooklands.
What a fate.
Yes, but he used to stop somewhere around Oxford each time and break the journey, then carry on the next day. And he almost turned back because he was feeling so unwell. And the first day, the weather wasn't good, and he stayed in bed all day. He left his team to work on the car, and then went out and tragically was killed. Still not quite clear. I mean, there are all sorts of stories about how the chain drive snapped, and that was what killed him. But Owen Winowen was adamant that the chain drive wasn't broken when he dug the car up. So it's, well, I could talk for hours. I can talk for Wales on one of our forgotten heroes.
Just amazing, absolutely amazing. And Pendine's still used these days, isn't it, for occasional speed events?
They do the odd speed event. Again, going back quite a few years, I can remember going down there for the BBC in Wales when they, I think it was the MG Car Club, took some 750cc cars down there and set a new class speed record with one of those. And I managed to persuade one of the drivers to take my cameraman down the sands with him, which was great. We had some wonderful shots. The only thing was when the cameraman got back, he was caked from head to toe in sand, and so was his camera. It took him about a day to clean the camera up again afterwards. I'm not sure I was that popular with him for a little while.
But you got the shot. That's the important thing. Yeah, absolutely. So your previous trip to Wiscombe Park was a long time back for the RAC Rally.
Yeah, it was. I think that was the year when it was the Lombard. So even before the Network Q, This was a special stage, and it was run downhill. And the likes of Roger Clark et al. Were competing in those days. So, yeah, several years ago now.
Yeah, my first visit here was the 1970s, so I always loved coming here, and particularly I enjoyed coming here to report the events, occasionally to help Pat Jennings in the commentary box. And Pat, I believe, is coming today. He's written a great book on Southwest Motorsport, his memories of the speed events, the sprints and hill climbs, which captivated him for decades. And that book has just come out, so it's
Well
one
worth the
worthy
read, I would think,
of
yeah.
picking up.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, my involvement with motorsport goes back to the 70s, but it was a slightly different hill climb. I started marshalling at Pontypool Park in South Wales, long gone now, sadly, but some of the biggest names in hill climbing certainly competed there. It was around at the national championship at one stage.
And the only was the only win at Pontypool Park for Ken McMaster, driving the Joe Marquardt designed Modus M4H that my good friend Barry Groombridge later owned, and I competed in here.
Wow.
Albeit with a 1600 BDA engine at that point. But yes, absolutely fascinating. Great place. And I enjoyed going down there probably 20 odd years ago now. I never went to Pontypool as a contemporary venue, but enjoyed rediscovering it. My first hill climbs were at Great Auckland near Reading when I was a kid, and it was probably only about 15 or so miles from home, and we used to go pretty much every year. The Hanson Barks Motor Club. It finished in the early 70s. Book being written about that at the moment as well by Steve Lovegrove. So that's going to be another important addition to my library, which I should really be thinning out. So let's have a look around the paddock. We've got a camera just walking up, mobile camera walking up through the paddock, and that's Andy, or Undi as he's now known, who is just capturing some of the atmosphere here, and it really is a glorious spring day. Feels like summer, doesn't it? I mean, once that sun came out, it's very good.
Can I just add one more reminiscence to my Pontypool Park story, and that is that one of the things that stood out for me, every September, the September meeting, we used to have motorcycles as well as cars there. And I can vividly remember the legendary Dennis Jenkinson riding his vintage motorbike up the hill with his beard fluttering in the breeze. And
what was he on then, do you think? He had a Tribzer at one point, didn't he?
Yeah, I think it could well have been that.
Yeah,
actually.
well, I remember seeing him. He was the he was the motorcycle outrider at Great Auckland.
Really?
Yeah, and he'd go up and down sort of between runs, etc. Great Auckland was only 440 yards.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing. And it was in the Hill Climb Championship pretty much from the start. And it was on a private estate like this, run by a guy called Neil Gardner, who was a biscuit magnate from Reading. And it continued right through to I think 74 in the end, and the ultimate record was set by Chris Kramer, who you mentioned earlier on, the German architect from Gloucestershire, who left it at 17.65 seconds, I think.
Crikey.
Absolutely staggering. These days, of course, it would never work, apart from the fact it's now a housing estate, but you couldn't have run today's cars on it. But downhill start and a banked right-handed corner, which caught out a lot of people, including Spencer Elton, who was a very good hill climber, who managed to invert a Formula 3 Brabham over the brook there, so that the wheels were straddling the brook either side, and he was sort of dangling in the water pretty much. But he and his father took the car home, stripped it down, put the engine and gearbox into another Brabham chassis, and went to invent Thruxton the following day, like you did.
Yes, yeah.
But, I think the practice for Great Auckland was on a Friday evening. I think it was some unofficial practice, and then the main day was a Saturday. And one of the great names there over the years was Doc Willoughby, Roger Willoughby, who was a director of Wiscombe
Right,
for
yeah.
many years later. And a lovely man. He had a supercharged Cooper V twin at one point, the ex-Dick Henderson car, I think. And he competed in a Brabham, and then had a March Formula 2 car with a Rover V8 engine in it, which he really enjoyed. But he was a GP over near Mortimer. I think he came from Salhampstead, but he's been gone a number of years now. But was always so helpful to competitors, and he was my go-to GP to get the medical done for my racing license, which he was incredibly thorough, and wouldn't take a traditional fee for. Doctors are supposed to charge for that sort of thing, but I think a bottle of Glenmorangie would do it. So I used to turn up with a bottle of Glenmorangie, very thorough medical, and we used to meet up here down at Wiscombe many times, and yeah, really great guy.
I would commend his taste in malt whiskies as well. Glenmorangie is my favourite.
So I'm just waiting as we see various great things in the paddock on our screens. A couple more vehicles have gone up the hill, and so I'm sorry that there's this delay, ladies and gentlemen, but at least we're standing in beautiful weather.
It is lovely, isn't it? It's hard to visualise a nicer setting, really, isn't it, for the vintage cars?
It is amazing. I mean, we know that Vintage Sports Car Club has hill climbs all over the country. It goes to Prescott is a particular favourite, isn't it? You love Prescott. You've commentated at Prescott. I've competed at Prescott, and Harewood as well is another great place up in Yorkshire between Leeds and Harrogate. That's another fine venue, but a lot of sprints as well. Kerborough.
Yeah, they were at Kerborough last week, I think, weren't they?
Yeah, that's right. That was the opening round of the championship, and the events come thick and fast because there've already been 2 circuit events. The Pomeroy Trophy, the annual Pomeroy Trophy, sort of kind of a mixture of driving tests and high-speed trials at Silverstone. That's always a great season opener. Tends to be in February, and then the first pucker race meeting of the year at Cadwell Park, which has a kind of similar kind of sylvan setting to Wiscombe, and on a beautiful day is peerless. On a miserable day is very gloomy. In common with most motorsport venues, in fairness.
Wasn't it used to do some of the scenes in the I can't think of the title of the film now, the Hunt Lauder film? They used it to recreate the Nürburgring, I believe, didn't they?
That's right, absolutely. Yeah, the 1 litre Formula 3 stuff. Some of that was filmed in little stretches of Cadwell, which they kind of stitched together. And yeah, some friends built some cars for that. A lot of those Formula 1 cars use that with Formula Vauxhall Lotuses that have been kind of reconfigured.
Yeah.
But yes, quite something.
I think was it in one of those cars at Crystal Palace that we first got a hint of James Hunt's fiery temperament?
James is amazing, and we remember him. He started out. He did a few saloon car races, then got into some Formula Ford, sponsored by Gowrings of Reading. Had the Lexus Formula Ford, then others, and yes, he was a bit mercurial. And in later years, after he'd retired from racing, he did a lot of work with Marlboro and with McLaren. And he used to come, on one occasion he came as an honorary judge to the McLaren Autosport British Racing Drivers Club Young Driver competition. And it was a very kind of miserable setting to start with at Silverstone. And as the day wore on, we saw nothing much of James, who presumably was commanding a fat fee for his attendance. Anyway, he wandered in the evening under cover of darkness while we were interviewing probably the 4th of the 6 contenders for this award. And we said, well, where have you been, James? And he said, I was down in Toaster. I went over and saw an old budgie breeding friend of mine, and we had a few bevies, and that was it. And you guys made the right decision. So that was that. And we made the decision. he took the fee.
I can't imagine why, but for some reason I thought there might be a young lady involved in that story.
No.
But
Well,
no.
if there was, he kept it close to his chest, and it was just budgies, which absolutely fascinated him and
Yeah.
energised him in his later years.
Yes, it's not something you imagine, is it? It's a bit like Keith Flint, who was in the Prodigy and ran his own motorcycle racing team. And if you think of Keith Flint in the video for Firestarter, this sort of manic, sort of demonic creature almost, and he was a prize-winning rose grower.
Really, yeah. But yes, Mr. Flint's musical career, whatever, is not one that's remotely known to me. It's
Right. It's remarkable, really, because I met him a couple of times. Sadly, he's gone now, of course. But I met him a couple of times when he was running his motorcycle race team, and he was relatively quiet, unassuming, quite an eloquent speaker. And then you'd see this crazed character leaping around the stage, shouting and screaming. You think, is it the same man? It was really was sort of almost like split personality.
And there you go. But yes, I think in this kind of setting, we'd be probably better off with some classical music. I think that's much more my bag, I have to say. Although I do like music of all genre pretty much, one or two exceptions. But
I think we'll drop the CD of the Prodigy that we had lined up for lunchtime today, actually.
It would be a surprise to me, and I may be enthused. Who knows? So I've seen a car, the 736, come down the hill. I think that car was probably just stuck up the hill at that point behind the scene of the incident, and that's Mike Pickup's Austin Ulster Special. So that is back down. Mike's out of the car and waiting, like everybody else, patiently for the red flag to be taken down at the start line, which would indicate that the course is clear. Great opportunities in the paddock, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got your cameras with you, or these days you've got your phones with you, to take some wonderful close-up photographs and some detailed shots and some overviews of the cars here. Quite a lot of Vintage Sports Car Club regulars have turned up in vintage cars, driven from all around the country. There's some fantastic cars just behind our commentary box in the paddock. We've got a very, very pretty Triumph TR3 and a stunning 1965 Jaguar E-Type fixed head coupe behind us, and then of course we go into the Pucker vintage cars as well, Rolls Royces, Bentleys and others, and stunning Elvis I see over there too.
You mentioned about using phones to take photographs and things. I'm sure, like myself, you well remember the days when after a meeting you'd be rushing to the railway station to get the films dispatched to London so they could process the film and then choose which pictures they wanted to use for Thursday's papers.
That's right, you had to be very, very careful if you were a photographer, because you probably only had a 36 exposure black and white film at the time, and you had to encapsulate your probably 7 or 8 race program. It wasn't like today's sort of 20-something races a weekend programs, and of course since the advent of digital cameras, if you want to take 30,000 images a weekend, you can.
Yes, absolutely.
And I know people who make very good livings out of taking photographs of motorcycle track days.
Yeah.
Where they do 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Motorcycle track days. They sell the images on the memory stick, whatever, and the track day organizer does all the work in raking the money in.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one. And yes, so we had when I was working for Autosport in the 1970s, I did 20 years with them full time, still doing freelance work with them 25 years after I finished that chapter of my life, so to speak. We had a lovely old boy called Fred Bauer, who used to go off around all the London rail termini, pick up everything from the Red Star offices, British Rail Red Star offices, and come back down to Teddington, and they'd all be sent off to the the lab, which eventually was set up in the basement of the building, and the colour work, which in those days was probably only the cover, maybe a centre spread, whatever. Father and son used to drive down from Dronfield near Chesterfield every Monday afternoon, wait for the selection, take it back with them, and then it will kind of appear on a newsstand on a Thursday morning or Wednesday night in some of the London railway stations, which was of course from which they were distributed. So quite something.
We talk about the colour centre spreads. On May the 13th, 1971, 3 days before my 13th birthday, I fell off my push bike and broke my wrist because I was trying to ride one-handed, not to crease the centre spread in my copy of Autosport.
Well, I'd have that copy of Autosport at home in my collection, that's for sure. You probably do as well.
Yeah. When they said motorsport is dangerous, I didn't realise that was one of the dangers.
Yes, I go back to I remember my 9th birthday, June the 4th, 1967, when Jim Clark won the first his first race with the Cosworth DFV engine in the Lotus 49. That was his debut at Zandvoort.
Yeah.
My 9th birthday. In those days, you just saw it on a little clip on the news on a minuscule black and white television in the evening. You didn't get the full tilt bogey if you had the right channels and you paid the right subscriptions to get it.
And then at one time, Blue Peter started recreating Grand Prix the week afterwards, using a Scale Extric set to explain what had happened in the previous.
I remember it on another program. I don't remember it on Blue Peter.
I thought it was Blue Peter. Maybe my memory's let me down.
It'll come back to me. The what?
Wasn't Magpie the rival on the other channel?
Oh, I don't know. But those were the days. Those were the days. So, we're waiting for an update on what is happening up the hill. Hope that we will be underway again relatively quickly with another vehicle going up. Yes, there was the Whistle Stop Grand Prix, wasn't there? I think it was called.
Yes, it's certainly nothing like the blanket coverage you get at Grand Prix these days. One to look forward to this evening, of course. It's an interesting circuit they've created up there in Miami. It's challenging.
Yes, so there's a big feature about it in Autosport this week. I haven't actually got round to reading. I was busy writing thousands of words of copy on last weekend's Donington Historic Festival, where the British Sports Car Club was represented by the entrance in the Mad Jack race, which is the race named after Richard Shuttleworth, Old Warden airfield over in Bedfordshire, isn't it? And he was a great racer and an aviator, and he won the 1935 Donington Grand Prix in Alfa Romeo P3, which was again an amazing part of that pre-war history at Donington Park.
Certainly in those sort of pioneering days, both of flying and racing, the two activities seem to go hand in glove, didn't they? A lot of aviators were racers and so on.
Yes, I mean, I guess that some of that was pecuniary, because he had an aircraft of their own, as Shuttleworth would have done. If you go to the old Warden flying days now, there's a museum of aircraft and cars there. But it's that sort of interesting speed, wasn't it? They're kind of cross-pollinated between the two. Yeah. And of course there were quite a few great racers who were Gulfstream Radio 2 various capacities, but also of course a whole generation of young aspiring drivers lost their opportunity
Indeed,
to get through to the
Yeah.
top levels because of that 6 years of warfare in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember reading Diane Bonato's book, Wolf Bonato's daughter, who, like a lot of women then, were delivering the fighters to the air bases and so on. And, it was quite a dangerous job they were doing, and a very important job. But the one story that sticks out in my mind, I think it was her 21st birthday. Wolf took her to Paris to show her the Bugatti that he'd bought her, and she didn't like it. She didn't want the Bugatti.
The wrong colour, was it?
I think she ended up with a Bentley actually, but she wasn't a Bugatti fan.
One of the places that remains for me to visit is what used to be known as the Schultz
Yes.
collection. I'd love to go and see
Yes.
that. Say that for my time eventually happens.
I've wanted to go there ever since I mentioned Dennis Jenkins earlier, and he wrote a book called The Schlumpf from Session. And ever since reading that, which was many years ago, I've wanted to get there and haven't done so yet. But there is a rather distressing photograph in the front of that where the workers in the factory, where the museum was effectively hidden behind the factory, and the factory went out of business. And the workers were so angry they vandalised a classic Bugatti. I think they set it alight.
Right. It was a textile company, was it?
It was, yeah. It was two brothers, wasn't it? The Schlumpfs. And I think the reason the business failed was because they diverted so much of the money into their collection of classic cars.
Right.
But it is an amazing, amazing collection.
Yeah, that's right. No, it's one that I very much like to go. I went down that way when I went to the Saint-Saëns-le-Rongier round of the European Hillclimb Championship in 1980. And I thought that this might be an opportunity. The people I was travelling with just were in too much of a hurry to get back to their business in London, so we didn't make it. But I was amazed recently to find that my eldest daughter's boyfriend, who was French, but his family, his father's family, was rooted in Alsace, had been to the museum a couple of times.
Yeah. Your eldest daughter obviously has good taste in men, then. Just take a little bit of a break, because we were being overpowered a little bit by the sounds of the helicopter.
Meanwhile, up in the paddock, our cameras picked out the beautiful Talbot 105, car number 50 which is David Saxel, long-time Riley competitor, but he's been out this year with the Talbot, designed by Georges Roche, with a straight six engine and a pre-selector gearbox. We've got a glorious Alfa Romeo there as well in the foreground of your pictures, and behind it, number 60, the Robert Frankham Talbot as well. Our roving cameraman has been out and about in the paddock.
George Roche was appears to have been an interesting character, sort of bit of the United Nations. He was born in Switzerland. I think his father was a German blacksmith and his mother was French.
Big cosmopolitan.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And why are the Roche Talbots green, the AV105s? Do you know?
I don't. I'm guessing you do.
Sorry, I can't help you. No, in fact, it was his wife's going away. The colour of his wife's going away dress after they were married.
Oh, so romantic.
And interestingly, the chassis of the Talbots were made and were used as the underpinnings of ambulances.
Really?
In the war years. So so a very versatile
they were
chassis.
Specifically designed, I think, when they were the sort of fairly flexible chassis to cope with uneven surfaces. And
Yeah,
so
you'd have thought that would work. Pretty large, softly sprung.
Yeah.
Great cars.
Yeah.
And had the great privilege of racing one a couple of times in the early 2000s, 2004 in the PRDC 500 recreation.
Really?
A race in which Britain's oldest then competitor, the late Tom Delaney, toppled out of his Lee Francis Hyper, but was racing again 3 weeks later. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have got news for you. Of course, obviously you'll have seen the air ambulance arrive, but the news is that the competitor who's had the incident up in the up towards Sawbench, which many of you will know was Terry Crabb, he is stable, and the air ambulance is here purely as a precaution. Purely as a precaution. I think they're awaiting the arrival of a land vehicle, but the good news is that Terry's stable, and we'll resume our action just as soon as we can. But that is the information from the Vintage Sports Car Club office over here, and we wish Terry well, and we will get back ASAP to the competition.
Terry, of course, driving the ERA R12C, which we were speaking about only earlier. It's got an interesting history, I think, that one, hasn't it?
An extraordinary history, but the ERAs, I think, are perhaps the vehicles that everyone aspires to within the VSCC ranks. If you start in a Austin 7, maybe move up through a Riley or something like that, everybody has just oogled an ERA over the years. They were made in the 1930s in a workshop in the garden of Raymond Mays's family home near Bourne in in Lincolnshire. So the first cars were Lincoln green, lovely sort of pale green colour, and there were A, B, C and D types over the years. Only middle teens of them in fact made, plus some later cars over the GP cars later on, but they were too little too late. Powered by a Riley derived engine and with a pre-selector gearbox, and they raced a lot of voiturette events, as well as the bigger internationals. Very, very successful in hill climbs. Raymond Mays himself driving ERA R4D, sort of works development car, the only D-type one. He was hugely successful, setting records everywhere he went, and delighted that Mac Hulbert is here at Wiscombe today. Mac was long-time custodian. They don't like to call owners, they're custodians. These wonderful pieces of automotive history, and so a big hi to our good friends Mac Hulbert and his wife Madge, who live locally these days. So nice of them to pop in to see the